I'm holding for 1 minute. I know there's a delay. Okay, maybe that's it for the delay. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope that was good timing. Happy Friday. Happy Friday, Linda. Cheers, my dears. We made it to Friday on the RCH. Oh, that is so nice. Thank you so much. Oh, you did cheers, my dears, and tulip flowers. It is, though. Isn't it a crazy weather day today for us in the Northeast? So good. This is some of the wine I got in Vermont at one of the wineries there, Putnam, Vermont. I forget what it was called, but it's like a crazy, like appley, mapley wine. So good. Crazy weather day here. I might as well tell you in case something bad happens. I'm not at the studio. I was at the studio at 7 a.m. this morning to try to crank on orders because the forecast is for very, very strong Wizard of Oz style winds, not hurricane, but super strong gales. So that worries me because it's been continual warning all day for us in this part of New England. So if I suddenly just go out, I don't know how that would happen, but I guess things can happen in wind. But if that happens, then you know what happened at least, that there's a crazy forecast and it's pretty severe. So it's windy out there now. We'll see what happens, fingers crossed, because it's our Friday. And I'm not at the studio. I'm in a chair in the corner of the dining room. And I just have to say before I do all the greetings, I feel so cozy today because first of all, it was frantic waking up early to work on orders. And I had this terrible sort of moment of it's been a while since I worked on a Friday night of commentary, because I usually go quite long on Friday nights. It's not a typical show. Because last week we played bingo. The week before I took off because I was in Vermont. The week before we had our game night. And it's been quite a while since I've had to think of what to do. And it occurred to me super late last night, toward the middle of the night, that I had no commentary. And I've got it. What I did was I went back to, for tonight's episode, I went back to like our roots. Because if you remember, if you were with me when we started Coffee Time last year, or if you've watched back to all of those early episodes, we were so heavy on history. And I feel like so many of us loved that part of it. It really connected us to the people that did this before us. It connected us to the craft and to the other, mostly women, men too, of course, but to all of those people. And we've been so busy lately with new books and reviews and new things coming out and projects and ideas, and all of that is great. But tonight we're getting back to the history of it. And we always talk about, because it's always said in books, that the first books on rug hooking were the W.W. Kent books, the three books that he did, the first one being The Hooked Rug, 1930. Well, these two books in my hand are 1927, respectively. They both are. Two different authors, both 1927. I think I'm only going to get, I forgot it's reversed. I think I'm only going to get to this one tonight. We'll see how it goes. But these books are gems. And I feel so cozy. I took a couple hours this afternoon getting away from the studio because I was worried about driving during the height of the wind, which I didn't have to worry about. But I spent a couple hours looking over these books, and I actually read one of them right through. And it was so charming. So I have earmarked almost every page of this book to share with you. It is so super charming. You're just going to fall into this happy, like, wrinkle in time tonight, thinking about these quotes and these ideas and these anecdotes. It's going to be a super high charm episode. Having said that, Mom, good to see you. I love chatting with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And Susan, hey, Susan, I got your package today. Susan sent two gorgeous. I'm going to show them on Monday. I'm showing them on Monday because I want to keep it all tidy. Magdalena Ebby Briner style patterns that she did. And when I saw them on one of the selling sites, and you put them on our page too, right, which is Rug Hooking and Punch Needle Club. Why can't I remember my own page? I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because I was working on that multicolor Magdalena version that I did of like her style thing, and I saw Susan's too, and I said, this is perfect because I'm working mine in crazy saltwater taffy colors, and I bought both of the ones I saw of Susan's, which are gorgeous. And I'm going to work those. I'm at least going to start them in two totally different palettes before I announce that class. I'm going to announce the class this weekend, but before we get to the class, I'm going to have started hooking them in three completely different palettes. And when I do that, I'll make sure that I show you my version, of course, and I'm going to show you Susan's 2 versions too. There's a lot of versions out there on the big rug hooking sites and things, but I have to say, Susan, I liked yours the most. I liked yours more than any that I've seen so far. Thank you so much for sending those. They're beautiful, and I hope you didn't rush. Sheila, happy Friday night from Benton City, Washington. Cheers, my dears. Kira, happy Friday. I have to send the info I forgot for the class on Sunday. I will send it before Sunday. Looking forward to seeing you Sunday too. Cheers from Plymouth. Jody, hello from Wyoming. How are you? Happy Friday, and it's good to see you. Linda B. Oh, Robin. Cheers, everyone. Cheers, my dears. Cheers. Happy Friday. We made it, right? This is a bad custom I have of doing a sip every time I see a cheers. Linda H. Happy cocktail night, Massachusetts. Great to see you. Oh, I love how you all greet each other. That is so friendly. Curious Mountain. Kirsten. That's a great name. Curious Mountain. Great to see you. Kirsten posted, again, in the Facebook group, such a great pattern today that you did with stencils. You're like associated with a cat rescue, and you have a beautiful cat that you rescued. I forgot the cat's name. It was such a cute name. It was like Beetlebug or Beetlejuice or something like that. But she did this beautiful composition using stencils of different cats in different poses. And it came out very Matisse, very jigsaw, very graphic and interesting, modern art style. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a great piece. I hope you're on Facebook just so you can see this piece. Hello from wet Vermont. Rain's brought snow melt and ponds are just starting to hit the flood stage. I bet it's going to be that muddy time of year. Everything melting, right? The mud season. That was me sipping my drink already, Mom. Like daughter, like mama. Joy, hello in Florida. Cheers, my dears. Happy Friday. Christine, hello in Brockport. You did lose power for a bit. Oh, you're having it a little bit worse. We were chatting about it, Christine and I, earlier about the storm coming and saying, fingers crossed that we can make it through cocktail night. All good there. We'll see what goes on here. There was a water spout over Lake Ontario. So glad it's Friday, right? Patricia, great to see you. Great to see you. Happy Friday. Oh, another Patricia. Hi, everybody. Hi, Diana. Watched your dyeing video from back in July, and it was great. Oh, I'm so glad it was helpful. I got to get some more videos out. Joss and I were supposed to finish her dyeing video today, but I guess we'll do that in the morning. It got all dreary and ominous, so we flaked out on that. Glad you enjoyed it. I did enjoy it hugely, Susan. Magby VG. Hello, everybody from Lancaster. Great to see you. Happy Friday. Kaz, you came on. I'm so glad. From Wisconsin. First time joining Cocktail Time. I'm so glad you're there. And I hope you're able to Zoom with us this week, too, because you're getting a little break in your schedule, I guess. So good to see you. Kaz was in the class that we did, what was it, on February. It was the box of chocolates with all of the sort of, it wasn't a lot of, I was going to say pinks, but it wasn't a lot of pinks. It was a lot of like reds, browns. It was a few pinks. It was a really fun class. Maybe I'll finally get time, get mine started too. Oh, start yours too, Susan. That'd be such a good pop. We'll be talking about Magdalena so much in the near future with that class coming up, and so many people interested already. It'd be awesome to see how you approach yours. I always love everything that you do. Heather, good to see you. Happy Friday. Junebug, that's it. I had the bug part right. I was, what did I say, beetlebug or something like that. Junebug, how cute. Helene, happy Friday from New Brunswick. Good to see you. Good to see you. And Elaine, good to see you. Happy Friday, Anita. Also up in Canada, Toronto, right, Anita? Happy Friday. Well, it is a happy Friday, other than this crazy storm. Yeah, it was an early day, but I'm in a super mindset. I'm in such a groove to do this tonight. I feel like we always enjoy talking about the history of rug hooking, and it seems like it would be an in a nutshell thing, doesn't it? Like you pull a loop through the backing, and that's the story of rug hooking. But it's not. There's so many people and players, and there's so many things to say. There's so many angles and approaches. These books just reminded me of that. I was initially going to grab the 3 Kent books, and do that for tonight. But then when I noticed that these two were even earlier books, I thought, let's see what we can glean from these two books, because they predate the Kent books by 3 years. And we need to start saying, when we talk about rug hooking books, we've looked at magazine articles from earlier in the 20s. We've looked at a couple issues in Coffee Time of Antiques magazine, the Antiquarian magazine. I think we've even looked at Modern Priscilla, those kinds of magazines from the 20s. And once in a while, they feature an article on rugs. But these, for me, are the first books that I can find in my collection that are specifically about hooked rugs. One of them is called Handmade Rugs, but 90% of the book is about hooked rugs. So that's where we're going to spend our time tonight. It's been a great day today. Despite the storm, it's Friday. And this is on a personal note, this is the first time in a long time that I've been aware that the kids are doing stuff with homeschooling that I think is excellent and worthwhile. Because I feel like this has just been, if you have kids at home or grandkids at home, or you're watching this homeschooling thing from a distance, it is like a pig's breakfast of stupidness. But today, on a Friday, the kids had two interesting things going on in class, and I think these are worthwhile things. One of them was they had to dig for earthworms outside in the garden. And I can't believe it, but they put on my dyeing gloves, because I have like 1,000 of them. I'm like hoarding them when I do my dyeing. They put those on, and that's not cheating, is it? And I wouldn't want to touch worms either, unless we're fishing. But they dug up earthworms for hours, and it was like old time Dick and Jane out there just doing their thing, going crazy, screaming, pulling up earthworms, saving them, naming them, all of that stuff. And then the other cute thing that happened, and I think this is super worthwhile. I wasn't here for it. I just had a recount of it. But the teacher was asking the kids, this is something we could all use once in a while, which things were real and which things were not. For example, dinosaurs, leprechauns, which one is real? Going to the moon in a rocket ship, ghosts. Yeah, maybe that's a tough one because some people truly believe in ghosts. But these kinds of things, and I just thought, interesting. Isn't that interesting? We get so in our grooves in life, and everybody's got an opinion now. Everybody's on the internet. Everyone's an expert on everything. And I thought, what simple, straightforward, quaint things these kids are doing today for a change. Instead of stupidness, really sweet, right? It just made my belief in the idea of school, particularly homeschooling, feel right again and feel good again. Like there is hope and promise that there's actually a way to teach kids stuff at home for the time being that isn't a complete and utter crappy waste of time. This was a good day. So I hope you're feeling that too. It's good when a good day lands on a Friday. Doreen, great to see you. How are you? Happy Friday. One more and then let's get going into this. All right, so the first book I'm going to look at tonight, I don't think we're going to be able to leave this book because I think we're all going to fall in love. It's called Handmade Rugs. Now, I review a lot of books, and they're all new books. And Anne, I'm saving you on this episode from immediately buying a book because these older books are harder to find, aren't they? As it happens, I do have one other copy because I accidentally bought two. And you know why I bought two? It's partly because I'm a boob, but I mean, they look different, right? They look completely different. It's the same book. So if you want this book at the end, I'm going to put this up for like $10 plus shipping. This is an amazing book. This could easily be my favorite book at this point. 1927. Handmade Rugs by Ella Shannon Bowles. And this is from the Derby Neck Library. And this book, just interest and curiosity, entered the Derby Neck Library. I'm not even sure where that is. Derby's a town in Connecticut, but I've never heard of Derby Neck. It might be a part of the town. It entered the library the year after it was written in 1928, and it said it was a gift of the state. I don't know enough about libraries to know how that worked, but I thought, isn't that cute? Everything is so handwritten in this book. This book by Ella Shannon Bowles was discarded at some point years ago, but this is a gorgeous book for quaintness, for history, for perspective, for point of view, because we're going to be able to, for the next while that we're together, an hour or two, put ourselves in the mindset of 1927. There's so many things we talk about with so much knowledge, accrued knowledge, learned things that are very easily accessible to us now on the internet, all of those things in the back of our mind as this crazy filter. But sometimes I forget that making a rug is making a rug. And the way she describes things and the simpleness and the charm and the sweetness and the easiness that the feel of this book has to it is so different than an oversized colored how-to book with tons of patterns and instructions. It's night or day. This is a bedside table book. This is a book, believe it or not. Hey, Kira, good to see you. Yeah, Derby. This is Derby Neck, but it's got to be part of Derby. It doesn't say, but it's got to be part of Derby because I'm in Connecticut. And I must have got it from somewhere. I might have got it from eBay, actually. So cute. But anyway, this is a bedside table book. Again, you think, what could you possibly want to read at the end of the night while you're falling asleep in bed about rug hooking? Wait till you find out. She's got a few. This book is advertised as having great colored plates, tons of colored plates. There's like 3 colored plates, but they're all super cute. And they're a bit random. They don't seem to correspond to what text is going on at the time. But these are old rugs that we're talking about because if this book is written in 1927, these rugs to her are antique rugs. And at that time, if you remember, it's a new thing for us to refer to antiques as being 50 years old, right? It used to be 100 years old. Only recently can you say something is an antique and have it be only 50 years old. That's a brand new thing. So when she's talking about antique rugs, she's talking about early 19th century rugs. So for example, this is the thumbnail I used of William Henry Harrison on horseback. If you remember, William Henry Harrison was the one of the presidents. I don't remember what number he was, but he's the one who died almost immediately upon entering office of pneumonia. I think he was something like 68 when he was elected, and at that time he was the oldest person to take on the office of being the president. But his sort of claim to fame was being in it for such a short time and then dying. This is a hat tip to patriotic rugs. She's showing this very old rug made about 1840 of William Henry Harrison on horseback and the famous log cabin behind him. This was a campaign emblem. It appeared in needlework in the center of the rug. So there's some needlepoint in it, and part of it is woolen cloth cut into strips, fold on a thread, then sewn into place. So there are 3 things going on: drawing, hooking, fulling with a needle, and needlepoint. So this is like a mishmash of a rug right here. But this is one of the few color plates, so I want to show it to you with the log cabin in the background. She will talk in this book about how the category of patriotic rugs is a thing. It's a really big thing. Lisa, good to see you. Happy Friday. Patriotic rugs are a really big thing. People will run out of, I don't want to say imagination, because life was busy, wasn't it, in the 19th century? Life was busy. I wouldn't say they ran out of imagination. I would say life was limited, too. Your exposure and your experience was only as far as your house and your neighbor's house, or wherever you were lucky enough to travel, which was probably not very far in New England at that time. So people tended to go toward motifs that were immediately there in their house, quilt patterns, lace patterns, glass patterns, right? Sandwich glass is a big thing at this time. And then things that they heard about, word of mouth things, like things that were happening in politics and in the country. So patriotic themes is a real big one. It's cute that she used that as the front piece there. So I'm going to read bits and pieces to you because this is so sweet. I don't want to paraphrase Ella's own words because her words are what make this book so charming. So chapter 1 is called Handmade Rugs, and she says, she sets up a lot of vignettes for you in this book, where she opens up a chapter with this beautiful scene where she waxes very lyrical, and it really puts you into a certain place at a certain time. I hope you feel the same way, because this is chapter 1, page 1. Handmade Rugs. Notes on the history of hooked rugs. Here we go. The strains of the wedding march pealed through the house. Preceding the bride were her maids, lovely in their gowns of sweet pea hues. Then, on the arm of her father, the bride came down the long room to meet the groom, who was waiting under the floral arch. All was most conventional, most correct, a fashionable home wedding. The wedding guest beside me touched my arm. Do you see upon what Priscilla and Roger are to stand while the ceremony is being performed? She whispered. It's his present to her, I understand. Certainly it was the most unusual bridal gift, a large drawn-in rug, meaning hooked, bearing a wreath of old-time posies worked out upon a background of softest tan, all the colors mellowed and beautiful by the passing of time. The bride was famed for her love of the tradition of bygone days, and it was rumored that the newly wedded pair was to leave for their honeymoon on horseback in the ancient colonial fashion. Knowing her tastes, her friends had sent gifts of pewter, reproductions, early cottage furniture, and glistening sandwich glass. But Priscilla counted the hooked rug, made years before by a forgotten craftswoman in a New England farmhouse, as one of her most cherished possessions, and planned that it should occupy a place of honor in her country home, not on the floor, but on the wall of the entrance hall. Isn't that a great way to start a 1927 book on rug hooking? I mean, I was in it. I was in it. My heart was in it as soon as I read that. I get teary-eyed for those simple times. I do too, Mom. Jody, oh, isn't it the sweetest, sweetest thing? I mean, you hear about bridal rugs and you hear about people standing on them, and it's just such a special thing. But the fact that her groom knew that this would be such a special present for her, and her friends were giving her pewter and sandwich glass and all kinds of beautiful things, it's just such a gorgeous story. So she goes on to describe the rug in great detail, because in books like this of this age, she's not actually showing the rug. I guess she didn't take a photo of it. She was at the ceremony. So that wasn't a possibility, but she can only relay the picture of it in lots of words. So she talks about the pattern of it, the height of the pile, all of the details. And then she says, such rugs as this have been made for many years by the country and village women of New England, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, the provinces, New York, Pennsylvania, and some parts of the South. Now, as we look at this book, let's file this stuff in our heads, because these are important bits of information she's giving us. She's giving us first-hand information pre-W.W. Kent. And her sort of perception, because she has in the introduction, which I didn't read, noted that she's written for all of the magazines at that time, all of the sort of equivalents of House Beautiful, all of those ones that aren't out yet, all of the modern decorating and antique magazines. She's already written for them before she writes this book. So her ideas, her knowledge is already vast by 1927 when she writes this. So every little tidbit that she says, we can assimilate that into what we already know from talking about history so many times. And it just reinforces things that we've already said. I see, is that true? The gifts I treasure most it's so true, Sheila, isn't it? It's so true. The gifts that are homemade are the most treasured. So that was such a sweet sentiment. So she's talking about the different places where rug hooking is really big then, right? It's changed. It's changed a lot in 100 years. But these are the places that she names. And she says, I've also heard of prized family hooked rugs crossing the continents in the days of the covered wagon. I would think so, right? But not very often. I mean, I would love to get the perspective. I know someone's on from Wyoming, maybe Washington State tonight, maybe other places. But I remember when I used to do tours as a tour guide, like in the Dakotas and Wyoming and Montana, I rarely found hooked rugs. Rarely. And I mean, I antiqued like it was my job. When I was not with my people on the microphone, I antiqued like a devil dog. So I don't remember ever finding a hooked rug in all of those years. So I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did right away on Conestoga wagons left and right. But I correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been out there since the kids were born. But I have always found it a lot harder finding hooked rugs that were brought out there years ago than I do finding them around New England and Canada and places like this. So she says, a woman living in California recently wrote me that she owned a rug carried by her grandmother from Maine in the early 50s. That's, I think we're talking about the 1850s. So this is interesting, because knowing that she had written for magazines for years on the subject of hooked rugs, she has had, again, in the preface, she has had lots of people having written her like Dear Abby letters and given them firsthand stories. Those are the stories I'm pulling out of this book tonight. Stories that people wrote to her because of her experience as a magazine writer. She's compiling them all in this book. This really is a must-have book. If you love bedside reading and you're not about patterns, you want to know more about the history, this is the best book I found so far. So, in any case, let me show you one of her black and white pictures. This is by Gertrude Dewagger, or at least owned by. The rug was made by the owner's grandmother. Okay. And Mrs. Dewagger, I might be saying that wrong, believes it to be one of the first hooked rugs ever made. The design is of a colonial porch, I'm going to show you in a second, with flower entwined pillars. The vase resting on the floor of the porch contains sunflowers of attar color. Attar color is like, it's a pigment that used to be much more common. It's like a paprika on the dusty rose side. It's between dusty rose and paprika. Red and white roses and buds, a calla lily, a leaf, fern fronds, and a few indigo blue flowers. Now, recall what I just said. This is a picture of a colonial porch with pillars. Now, let's look at this together because to me, this looks like a straight on still life bouquet. But my question is, were people in the 1920s people regard this composition as a colonial porch? That's something that I have not heard yet. That's the first reference I've heard to a design that looks to me like flowers in a cup on a tiny border with a small floral border around it. That's the first time I've ever heard a design that looks like this referred to as a colonial porch with pillars. I am filing that in the front of my mental file cabinet because that is so interesting that she would say that. She wouldn't have said that if she hadn't heard that before. She wouldn't have written that in a book if she hadn't heard that before, which begs the question, was that a thing? Did people in the 1920s regard these kinds of designs that we just refer to as a simple primitive as a colonial porch? I mean, that's something that could use a bit of research. I don't know how to go about it. Jody says, I've never seen a hooked rug in the way you speak in Wyoming. I'm a big antiquer too. Yeah, I love Wyoming, Jody. I love it. And I hit every antique store I could find in those days. Dave, good to see you. Happy Friday. Dave, we're looking at a really old book tonight, 1927. You're going to love it. It's filled with history. I think all New England people snuck out west and bought all the hooked rugs. Sheila, I wouldn't be surprised if they bought them all and brought them all back to the East Coast. I wouldn't be surprised. But I am I'm so interested in this concept of the colonial the colonial porch, because if she's calling that simple design that I would just call like flower urn design, if she's called that a colonial colonial porch with pillars, it makes me wonder: are there sort of other sort of 1920s or early 20th century slang names? Because I think we have been saying the names that Pearl McGowan assigned to rugs for decades and decades. It's making me wonder what people before Pearl McGowan called these rugs. Do you see what I mean? It's like putting a huge, if there was like a thought bubble over my head, if I was that good at technology, I'd draw one, because it's really making me wonder. Oh my God, is Mohair there? Mohair, Judy, you are on. There you are, my love. Good to see you. Good to see you. We're looking at an old 1927 book tonight. Judy, you're going to love it. I call my buddy Judy Mohair because she went to, what was the name of Margaret's place? Mill River Rugs in Northampton, Florence, Mass. And Judy went in there and she wiped the store out. She bought all the mohair they sold, right? It was crazy. It was a crazy, crazy sale. So talking about Antiques magazines and stuff, she's talking about an article at Antiques Magazine. And incidentally, all of the references she makes to old magazines in this book, I just went on eBay and I bought them all. So we can look at all of these in coffee time in the future. All of the ones that were available, I just bought them, and I'll tell you about them because there's more copies available. But some of them are just going to be a snippet here and there, but it might be interesting stuff that really gets you in the heart or gets your brain going with other questions. So she's talking about the Antiques Magazine's articles and stuff, and she's talking about the history of hooked rugs and how old they actually are. Now, this is a question that people answered with absolutely no hesitation in the 1960s, 1970s era. They would say, oh yeah, they're Egyptian, or they go back to the days of British sailors, you know, the thrums on boats, you know, the ends of ropes. They would use the pile of those and make their own. And people with no hesitation would tell you that hooked rugs dated from here, there, or anywhere. And we have since been able to look at some of the rugs that people were looking at and calling hooked rugs and found that they were sewn rugs, or, you know, chenille rugs, different caterpillar rugs, different kinds of rugs. And they were done not with a hook, but with a needle, which doesn't make them bad. It just makes them not hooked rugs. So we have a lot more information right now. But in 1927, Ella is saying, I really do not know what the origin of hooked rugs is, and nobody does. She is saying that flat out. She says, she makes a long statement about really not knowing. And she says, this statement is borne out by other authorities. The secretary of the Essex Institute at Salem. Now that makes me wonder if that's now the Peabody Essex Museum. I wonder if anybody knows that. But the Essex Institute at Salem, Mass. Wrote to me that he had no information as to date in regard to the hooked rugs that they had at the museum. The librarian of the New Hampshire Historical Society wrote, unfortunately, we are unable to date any of our hooked rugs. And the curator of the Memorial Hall at Deerfield, Massachusetts, that's a great place to go, answered my question in regard to her knowledge of the age of hooked rugs by saying, different kinds of rugs were made in the 90s and probably earlier. At that time, they were sold and brought a considerable income to the makers. And she said, my mother had hooked rugs made by a relative in Vermont, I think in the 70s. She's talking about the 1870s. So she can't go with her vast knowledge. You know, this contemporary knowledge at the time before computers, when hooked rugs were in the 20s and 30s, of course, very popular during the arts and crafts movement, different episode. But if Ella, writing this book, has done this kind of research, and people are flat out at every turn saying, yeah, we really don't know. It's not a known fact. And nobody is saying to her, well, you know, I know it's the Egyptians. Nobody's saying that. That's something that happened later. That's the great thing about looking at a period book like this. We do have new knowledge now because things emerge like diaries and documents, collections, things that are unearthed from people's homes, and you can very accurately date them. But at this point, she's doing a lot of research, and she is a well-known person, and she doesn't have the answer to this question. So she goes on to talk about Ralph Burnham, who we talk about a lot on this show, and he's a contemporary at this point, right? He's busy. He's working in hooked rugs. And if you remember, he's from Ipswich, North Shore, Cape Ann, Massachusetts, above Boston. And accent just slipped out, didn't it? And he's the person who could not be done nowadays, but he's the character who had an antique store, and he kept advertising for hooked rugs, and he offered to fix people's hooked rugs, like repair them. And when people sent them in for repairs, he copied them, and then he made other new versions of them. And of course, nowadays that would be hugely frowned upon because everybody is so proprietorial and dog at the hydrant about their own designs. This could not happen now, but at the time, I don't know if it should have happened, if he should have done what he did by borrowing all these designs and using them to sell. But in doing so, he saved a lot of designs, and he documented a lot of designs. So he's a contemporary of hers. And she says, let me quote from one of the booklets written by Ralph Burnham of Ipswich, Mass. He wrote, several prominent writers upon the subject strongly contend that the deservedly popular floor covering antedates the American Revolution. A still more venturesome writer of reputation asserts that hooked rugs were in evidence earlier than the year 1700. So she's very skeptical about relaying Ralph Burnham's information. She's very skeptical because she cannot, in 1927, verify this with people who she considers to be authorities on the subject, people who are working not at antique stores, not that I'm devaluing his contribution at all, but people who are working at museums, and this is their job and this is their life. She still cannot say, she flat out says there is no evidence of a rug that dates to 17 anything. So she's very clear about that. She leaves the possibility, she leaves the door open, but she's very clear that the date is just not solid. So she also says, it is pleasant, she talks about the possibility of there being rugs, in the 1700s. And she says, it's pleasant to believe this, even if we cannot prove it. And I see no reason to doubt that the women who knew the arts of making samplers, embroidering coats of arms upon cherished bits of satin, and working mourning pieces, like when someone passes away, did hook in or draw in pictures, meaning with a hook, like draw them in, hook them in. She's using those two things interchangeably, upon loosely woven linens, to be used as floor coverings in their best rooms. The early 19th century at least produced home-knitted mittens, which were decorated with hooked-in patterns of gay wools. So she's making the point that, people would knit mittens, and then they would add, with a hook, embroidery designs into the mitten, into the knit of the mitten. So she's leaving the door open saying, you know what, I'm translating here very loosely, It's possible. Women did all kinds of things with needles and hooks. It's possible. There's just no proof of it. So she goes on to say that I am of the opinion, I love this line, I'm of the opinion that any rug, if the design was original, was a form of art. So she's giving credit to every woman and man who ever made a rug, no matter when it was. She's very, very kind in this book to people of the past and of the day of the 20s who are still making rugs. She's a super kind person, and you can really feel that in her writing. She talks about Katherine Lee Bates. I know we've talked about her too. In her book called American Literature, she says, this is another sweet quote, Katherine Lee Bates tells us, a dozen factories were gathered into a farmhouse kitchen where thin-lipped women baked and brewed, washed and ironed, canned and pickled, compounded the family physic of snail water, meaning making medicine, with ruby jellies to obliterate its taste, spun, wove, knit, quilted, made candles, soap, sausages, rag rugs, feather beds, and were by turns seamstresses, milliners, tailors, with frequent calls away to the dairy, poultry yard, and milking stool. So when she's saying there are a dozen at least factories in every person's home, it's so true. It's so important to give that hat tip to the people of this era that we're talking about, like the 19th century, because they were like energizer bunnies of industry within their own homes. She says there is one test which you may safely apply to hooked rugs when you're trying to tell a little about their age. And that is the kind of material used to make the foundation. Now, we've said this before, but it bears repeating here. We are told that cotton cloth was not made in England until after the year 1760. So it seems probable that it was not in common use in America until the beginning of the 19th century. I'm going to she doesn't add this, but I'm going to make the follow through thought that if we're talking about the year 1760, we're already talking about a period where Americans are boycotting things that are coming from England. So if it's being made in England, we are not using it in the colonies at that point because we are boycotting at this point. I think that's an important thing to note. Did you say Katherine Lee Bates? Did I say Katherine Lee Bates? Yeah. Isn't she the one that wrote the Star Spangled Banner? Am I thinking of the wrong person? Kathy Lee Bates. Yeah, isn't she the one, Katherine Lee Bates? Wait a minute, is she the one that broke, the Stephen King broke the knees with the baseball bat? Now I'm confused, but it does say Katherine Lee Bates, definitely. I thought she wrote the Star Spangled Banner or one of those, and also some history books and stuff. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know if I'm wrong. I love to be wrong because then I learn something. So we're talking about, like, the idea that if cotton was manufactured at that time, we would not be using it anyway. And we already knew this. I'm just driving the point home. It'd be safe to say that a hooked rug would be made on homespun, home-woven linen, something made at home during this period until, she doesn't say it in this book, and this is what the internet is great for, until the early 19th century when we know that Hessian or burlap was being manufactured in India. So until the early 19th century, we were using homespun here in the United States. So if you see a rug and you get any glimpse of the backing, it's not going to be cotton. It's not going to be a manufactured woven. This is something that maybe the layman doesn't know anyway, even with a microscope. But it's a good point to make that we're not looking at burlap as a backing until the early 19th century. Scott Keys, thank you, Dave, thank you. I'm crossing all kinds of wires here. Yeah, that's right. And there was a terrible murder with the Scott Keys family in Washington, D.C., right? I know there's people on from Washington, D.C. Wasn't there something awful about, there was like a murder to do with the Scott Keys? I'm crossing wires. Drove down a street named after her today. Oh, how interesting, Carrie. You know what that means? You should go get a lottery ticket, right? I don't believe in lottery tickets except when crazy coincidences happen. And you drove down Katherine Lee Bates Street, and I just came out of my mouth. So maybe that means something, right? Unless there's a hurricane outside. But if there's not, after the show, maybe you should get a lottery ticket. You never know. America the Beautiful. Okay, there we go. How funny. How funny. We're brainstorming. So she says, I've discovered no record of hooked rugs in old wills. Now, this is interesting, too, because she's done so much research by the time she writes this book. She's saying, in terms of being able to track and date hooked rugs, she's never found an example of one being given to anybody in a will. Now, that's very telling. That tells you a lot about how people saw hooked rugs in terms of money value, right? Not at all. So she's saying, I've never discovered a record of hooked rug in an old will, but in the inventory of the estate of Nathaniel Shannon, who died in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, love Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in the latter part of the 18th century, I find listed together, this is offensive, I'm just warning you, 1927, listed together with a Negro man named Prince, foreshadowing there. I hope he had. I hope he had a what's it called? Reincarnation life and actually became Prince because he definitely deserved it, right? Named Prince, valued at £400. A woman and child. A woman was called Diana, valued at £300. Half a dozen turkey worked chairs, so embroidery, and among the other household furnishings, 2 rugs valued at £12 and 10 shillings each. So not willed, but just in the inventory and not valued high at all. Only reference she was able to find. There's absolutely no proof that these rugs were of the hooked variety. In other words, they could have been sewn rugs. But the mentioning of them in the inventory is interesting to the collector. And indeed, it really is. So she shows, I'm going to show you the color plates as we go along because she really sort of esteems this picture as being so, so, so quaint. Now, doesn't this look too like it could be a lot of 19th century prints, you know, that they would publish in like La Mode Illustrée or Godey's or one of these fashion magazines? It looks just like the kind of print, you know, the nature print that somebody would rip out of a magazine and put into a frame. So it goes to, it makes a lot of sense. Hold on, glass of wine, glass of wine. Teddy's coming to photobomb us a little bit. Come down so everybody can see your sweet little face. Normal? Did you catch some worms today?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, don't trip on the cord. Don't trip on the cord. Don't trip on the cord. Sorry. Broken record. Crazy times. All right. It makes me nervous when he comes near the wire and the wine. So, all right. So then she goes on to say, in New England, hooked rugs reached their height. Get ready for this. Hooked rugs reached their height of popularity in the Civil War period. Just want to remind you, 1927, right, we are right on the edge of the arts and crafts period in this country. So while she's writing this book, the arts and crafts movement is ramping up in a massive way. And she's saying at this point, it's correct information in 1927, but the Civil War period was a huge period for hooked rugs. But it is about to be, like this year and the next year, getting right into the early 1930s, the absolute height of hooked rugs that we have never seen since then. The whole arts and crafts, the cottage industries, that whole at-home craft movement, this will make the Civil War period for hooked rugs look like it was nothing. It was a blip on the radar. So it's just funny that she's writing right before the real pop and interest in hooked rugs happens. Oh, thanks for saying, Teddy, you have a couple buddies saying hi to you. Such a good boy. We'll see something amazing if it's like, oh boy, I don't think they want to see that. Okay. I'm so sorry. Here, let me show. Now they're going to be in suspense. There's a terrible, this is going to haunt your dreams, so close your eyes if you don't like things that are awful. This is a customized Teletubby from a horror game. Sorry about that. He customized it himself. It looks like we have a lot of psychological problems, but it's actually extremely accurate. So just let that go. Anyway, crazy. We were doing that at my mom's house last weekend, and she did the eyes with the red color. We cut up red yarn from her stash, her punch stash. She was sewing them in, and we looked at each other about 100 times and said, "Is this normal?" Not normal. So arts and crafts movement. So she says the earliest rugs show delicate. Now this is where inspiration comes into these early rug designs. The earliest rugs show delicate vine borders and realistic baskets of sprays and flowers drawn upon a background without attention to formal design. People are still drawing them by themselves. Yes, of course, Edward Sands Frost was a huge thing. Of course, the Garrett blue nose patterns and stencils were a huge thing. Oh, I was almost scared to look at what the comments would be. Thank you for saying very creative. He customizes everything that we find. We found that Teletubby in an antique store last weekend, and thank God it wasn't expensive because you saw what happened to it. He's very proud of the transformation. So she's talking about where inspiration comes from, and she's saying black outlines were seldom used. Mary Johnson Carey, who I figured out is another person who's a contemporary of hers who writes for magazines also, who wants to be normal. That's right, Heather. This person suggests that these soft shades are sort of like harken back to fine embroideries, brocaded stuffs, meaning fabric, from old dresses brought from France and England, samplers, early rugs. She's saying that the style of design, people drawing patterns onto their own rugs, not with any help from Sans Frost or anybody's stencils, just on their own. They are looking at embroidery designs, quilt designs, designs that they see on dresses, patterns they're seeing on fabric. Of course they're looking at that stuff because they can't pull up the internet. What else are they going to think about when they're sitting there with a piece of charcoal trying to figure out how they're going to, what kind of design they're going to make and how they're going to fill the empty space? So they were completely looking at these things as reference points. Precise and formal trees, set baskets of flowers, houses, figures. She mentions presidential campaigns and talks for a while about patriotic symbols and motifs. She talks about glass making a lot in this book. And I think partly is because she's a New Englander. She's from New Hampshire, the author. But I think part of it is also because this huge, if you're an antique person, you know the 1920s, 1930s, there's a huge sort of renaissance of interest, I have a tickly hair, in sandwich glass, meaning the glass made from Cape Cod, the first glass made in the U.S. as far as I know. At least that's what I said on my tours. But there's a huge revival of interest in sandwich glass, and people are using sandwich glass patterns like that they pressed into their glass in everything. And hooked rugs designs are no exception. You're seeing a lot of sandwich glass patterning in hooked rugs of this period. So she makes lots of references to, she references Sandwich Glass Company, also the Aubusson carpets that were coming from abroad, New Englanders, because that style of carpet, that sort of design, that very formal design was so popular, people copied it as hooked rugs. People copied. They copied everything because there was nobody on Facebook to say to them, that's too close to my design, I'm sending you a cease and desist letter. There's nobody to say that. They would say, I like that carpet in my neighbor's house, and they would go home and try to remember it, snapshot in the head, and try to draw it as soon as they got home. And why shouldn't they, right? That was their chance to do something really pretty that they liked too. And nobody would have ever said anything about that, partly because people were nicer then, I think. A few years ago, hooked rugs had very little value except to their makers, who prized them as coverings for their yellow painted floors in their forerooms and kitchens. Now that phrase in itself really stuck out to me, because is there a thing about yellow painted floors? I wasn't alive in the 1920s, and my grandmother had linoleum floors, so I can't picture it. But again, a small little touch like that in a book of this age really makes you think, was that a thing? Do you know if that's a thing? Because I would be so curious about the yellow painted floors. This is a quote. She says, this is another woman who she talked to that got in touch with her through the magazine. This woman is saying, I gave my son's wife a hooked rug, and she used it in front of the kitchen stove. An old woman told me. It was lots of work to make it. I thought she might have put it in her bedroom. This shows how little hooked rugs were prized in remote rural districts until collectors and interior decorators began to seek them out to use with their early American furniture. So true. And this goes back to, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but you remember the Coffee Time episode where I was talking about Wallace Nutting, the photographer, who's a little bit before this book. And he took so many beautiful staged photographs of colonial American houses. The houses were old, but the furnishings were not. They were all replicas. He put down tons of braided rugs, no references to hooked rugs, but lots of braided rugs and handmade rugs. None of them were accurate for the colonial period. But people, having seen those images for all of those years, they began to think, because they had no reason not to, that that was accurate. So that's one of the many things over time that has skewered our thoughts about the age of rugs, where you see somebody as successful as Nutting, who put hundreds or more images in front of people then and now. We still see the images that were technically incorrect. They were super beautiful and super charming, but they were super incorrect, and it gave people a lot of false impressions. Who cares, right? But it's just one of those things that helps explain why people are so confused about the age of rugs. She also says, a gentleman who spent some years in Newfoundland, this is interesting, told me that in the spring of the year, wives of fishermen put mats, as they called them, onto their frames. This man really did some constructive work by directing the women in the use of less brilliant colors. I'm thinking, is this Grenfell? But I'm thinking it can't be, because Grenfell is 1892 and this book is 1927. But it certainly sounds like Grenfell, doesn't it? Less brilliant colors, and in the drawing room, more pleasing designs for them. At the time, all the workers in the locality made the mats or rugs simply for their own houses. And then she gets into how they started selling them. So that really made me think there's a big time gap if she is talking about Grenfell. But it is a reference to Canada and a man taking charge and changing the color scheme, which is super evocative of Grenfell because he went to a completely different color palette. And our next chapter is so cute. It's called Colors Fade and Faded and Fresh. Now here's another one of these. I got to take a sip. If you love the beginning of the first chapter with the bride standing on the rug with the groom, you're going to love this even more. This is a total tearjerker, Mom. I'm just warning you. Here we go. The poet stood in the unkempt dooryard of a desolate house where the auction was in progress. He was clinging fondly to a couple of garishly colored hooked rugs, which were carefully draped over his angular right arm. A stranger might have wondered at his interest in these crude products, but I understood. For I, too, knew the story of the drab woman who made them. In a life of tragedy so vivid that it would not ring true if written, these rugs stood for the only bits of joy and color that the maker knew. Denied by an eccentric, crabbed husband the delight of fixing up the house, she hid in the corn chamber her rug frames and odds and ends of cloth, which she had surreptitiously dyed. Then, when her puritanical spouse went to town, she feverishly worked to create her vision. And up there in the corn chamber, after her death, were found the rugs, crude expressions of a beauty-starved life. You know, number one, total tearjerker. Such a beautiful image. This is the author who's talking about being at this auction with this man who ends up buying the rugs. My second question is, what is a corn chamber? I don't know, and I guess it doesn't matter to the story, but I just thought, what a beautiful sort of anecdote. She has lots of pictures throughout this book about, Mom. She's got a lot of pictures. This is one she talks about. She went to a lot of people's homes over her career documenting hooked rugs. And these people seek her out, right? So she has got a lot of choices. People are writing and saying, I have hooked rugs in my home. Would you like to come over and see them? This is one of those cases. She says a most unusual and interesting stair runner bearing hooked designs of birds and animals is in the summer home of Mrs. Parker Whittemore of West Gloucester, Mass. And this is what this looks like. I'm thinking that Mrs. Parker Whittemore really liked her hooked rugs because check this out. This is the runner she's talking about. You can see how detailed it is, but you can see 4 other hooked rugs. And I think I see a hooked chair pad. I think there's something hooked on the hall table there. That's a lot of rugs in one space. So she obviously loved him. It looks like she has a sampler up too. This is my kind of house in Gloucester, Mass. So through this book, she scatters these kinds of pretty pictures of places that she was able to go to, people's private homes, where she was able to take photographs that are not staged. It's the woman's hall, I assume. And then she's putting, this is another one of her pretty color pictures, one of the few. And I'm going to tell you about this one in a minute. This one, for me, doesn't really strike me at all. And doing things in twos in terms of composition is not a good thing to do. But this somehow works. It's a really unusual composition. She writes, of this rug, Alice Van Leer Carrick said, it is the finest in color and lustrous sheen that I've ever seen. It was picked up in a cottage in the central part of New Hampshire and is owned by Mrs. Frances Shepherd of Dover, New Hampshire. Now, this is where she starts talking about colors a little bit. Colors faded and fresh. This chapter is super interesting, particularly for people who enjoy dyeing. Oh, I know, Kira. I'd love them all over the house, too. I can't imagine. It would be so nice. I can't imagine. I know, Mom, all that talent and her crabbed husband. You never hear that word anymore, but her eccentric crabbed husband that kept her from doing anything that she could express herself with. Super, super sad story. But she goes into color a lot. She uses, I'm just going to warn you again, this is a 1920s book. She uses a lot of expressions that I'm sure were very common expressions at the time, but would now be seen as insensitive expressions. Let's just leave it at that. I don't want to start a conversation about what's okay and what's not. I have a very high threshold, but I also hope I'm super understanding. So I'm going to cut out you'll see if you get the book that there's a few that are like beauties. But again, it's not Ella, it's the time, and it's she's using color names for different browns. That gives you a hint. So I'm going to skip over that part, but it's very technical, and the ideas, the overarching ideas, the times aside, are very useful to people who die. I'm looking at them again and again and again, and I'll continue looking at them because she's talking about colors that complement other colors. And she knows that she's writing to an audience of people who don't have a college education or a high school education and don't have any sort of familiarity with the color wheel. And this is just not part of their lives. And she's literally telling them outright over pages what goes with American Beauty as an American Beauty rose. And the answer is fawn, right? This is almost like Family Feud. What goes with amethyst? Well, Delft blue, gold, orchid, and turquoise. What goes with apricot? Beaver. Right? Beaver's the color. So there's like pages of this, and the colors, besides the naughty ones, there's lots of colors that you know exactly what they are, but I just haven't heard anybody refer to them as a color before, like beaver. Super interesting, super time capsule, this book. And she says, A.H. Church says, this is so good. This is so good. We have to put this on a banner or something. A.H. Church, I could not figure out who this person was, but I'm assuming it's another colleague of her from the magazines, says, let it be remembered, however, that no rigid rules of cast iron should be allowed to trammel the imagination of the artist, to whom there are many things more important than rules, such as observation, knowledge, and experiment, a cultivated taste, sound judgment, and light fancy, and appreciation of what is meant by balance, distribution, and reticence of tone. That is at this time, that is such a freeing sentiment that he could be slamming you with art history, right? He could be slamming you with fine art, but he's saying, let it be known. You know, your idea of what's pretty is different than my idea of what's pretty. Your idea of taste is different than mine. I think that's super ahead of his time to be saying that in the 1920s and for somebody to write it down in a book. She talks about Helen Albee. To remember, we talked about Helen Albee ages ago at Coffee Time. She did the book of Native American designs. It's available on Amazon, but there's not one image in the book of a rug. So that is troubling. And there's not a lot of images of Helen Albee designs on the internet, period. So also troubling. Do you want to say hi real quick?
Yes.
All right, let me get my drink.
My brother is being
Don't say something fresh.
a thing upstairs.
He's being a thing.
That's the only thing I could think of.
Okay, just leave it at a thing. We'll just say he's being a thing. Want to say happy Friday to everybody?
Happy Friday.
We're going to do our video tomorrow. We're going to finish our dyeing with food coloring, right?
Mhm.
Love you. All right.
I love you.
I love you. Oh, Susie, good to see you. Good to see you. So she's talking about Helen Albee. And, you know, this is really jarring in contrast to what I just said, which was one paragraph before. I think she's making the point that it's jarring. Nothing against Helen Albee. Totally different school of hooking, right? So she's saying Helen Albee suggests that if a dull, rich color predominates, then you should only use rich, dark colors throughout the whole scheme. On the contrary, if you're using soft, light tones for like the motifs, the main parts, you should use all soft, light tones. I personally don't agree with that. And I think that our aesthetic in terms of what we like to look at and what our idea of balance is, just like the guy before said, Church said, everybody's idea of balance is different. But I think Ellen Albee's is like all dark or all light. That's not something you hear often. That's a personal choice. Certainly that works sometimes. Everything works sometimes, right? A broken clock is right twice a day. I'm not saying that her theory's broken, but you know what I mean. Oh, thank you for saying hi to Joss. Your buddies are saying hi to you, Joss. So this is what the author's response was to that. She's not being confrontational and awful, but this is her response to dark goes with dark and light goes with light. She says, look around you, an artist once said to me, and notice how nature uses her colors. Now that is a good point, right? You look up at the night sky, it's all dark, and then there's these bright, bright, bright dots. You look at a garden or a field, and it's all this sort of straw, yellowy, grassy, whatever color, and these pops of red poppies, bright flowers. Nature uses colors in balance, right? Nature doesn't go full blast one color. Nature shows you variety. And she's making this great point. You know, you can go with the palette of same if you want to, but you don't have to. That phrase that we use a lot in rug hooking these days, it's a new phrase, dark, light, dull, bright. right? That's like a winner. Tamar Pavich writes that in her books. Dark, light, dull, bright. Because having those things in balance is almost a guarantee that even if your composition isn't perfect, the rug's going to be perfect because your colors are going to pop. So that's a good thing. Can't wait for your video. Video will come out tomorrow, I promise. I can see her stuff drying over there, and it's so pretty. She did a nice job. So then she talks about designs for hooked rugs, and this I think is really interesting from a historical point of view too. Talking about how people got their designs for rugs. You know, aren't we so used to people telling us in older books this is how people got designs? She did a little bit of it, you know, sandwich glass or looking at quilt patterns or looking at lace patterns or whatever. But she has a whole chapter of more ways that people found designs. This book is amazing. So she says one designer of modern rugs, she's talking about Ralph Burnham again, has developed the idea of these old picture rugs. In other words, using pictures in rugs, using patterns for stagecoaches, taverns, fireside scenes, hunting patterns. So she's saying he's a big one for not just doing the florals and the scrolls and the medallions, but for doing pictorial rugs, right? So that's interesting that she recognizes that he's doing different work because he's a contemporary of hers at this time. And she goes on to say, environment influences designers. This is very intuitive. Environment influences different designers in their choice of subjects. You don't hear that in books of this age. She's absolutely right. The rugs made by women of the Cranberry Islands in Maine were typical of their seafaring life. In other words, their designs were the sand by the tide, the waves lapping up the beach, seaweed, shells, tips of distant sails at sea. So she's making that point, and then she says, I am indebted to Mary Johnson Carey for this information from her article in the Antiquarian. I ordered it, the Antiquarian magazine. I ordered it, so we'll look at it another time. About the whaling industry in New Bedford, Nantucket, which was like the capital of whaling in the 19th century, right through the beginning of the 20th century. And it was an industry that took like all of the able-bodied men out of the houses and out to the water, further and further out to sea. But she's making the point that the women who hooked rugs in that immediate area were hooking whale themes, right? Again, can't get through another Friday night without saying Claire Murray, but those kinds of themes, because that is what they knew. And you popped on, a corn crib is a type of granary used to dry and store corn. And thank you. It may also be known as a corn house. And thank you so much from Wikipedia. I Googled that earlier and I couldn't find it. Thank you for finding that. I was wondering if it was like a slang word or if it's a real thing. It's a real thing. So sad, but thank you. Now we all got another vocabulary word. That's excellent. And then she says, rugs perfected by workers in Labrador, heading back up to Canada here, under the patronage of Dr. Grenfell, right? So she doesn't know who he is, show how the modern hooked rug is influenced by environment. And she's talking about how the one time she saw a Grenfell rug was in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And she's saying it was in the nursery. A friend had a nursery in their home, and they had a Grenfell rug on the floor. And it was a dog team, the sledge, the snow, and the evergreen trees. So that made her think of Grenfell and them, you know, designing Grenfell mats in the style of things they saw, animals and nature. And she said, this is a great touch. She said, did you know that the laying of the Atlantic telegraph cable influenced the patterns used in American handcrafts? No, I didn't. The cable pattern is frequently seen on pieces of sandwich glass, and I wouldn't be surprised if she also wrote a book about sandwich glass, and is sometimes found on hooked rugs. She says, Mr. Robert Peckett of Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, owns a rare rug bearing an exquisite floral pattern framed with the endless chain border, which represents the Atlantic cable. Now, I would have to add to this, being of, you know, the 20th century, now the 21st, I would have to add to this, this is one of the dangers of the internet here, it also symbolizes the Oddfellows, right? The fraternal organization, the chain. Typically with the Oddfellows, you get 3 links because it stands for 3 separate things, if you remember last trivia night. So I would go along with what her logic and say rugs of this period that were the same sort of period as the laying down of the Atlantic cable. If it's a never-ending cable, that probably is a hat tip to the Atlantic cable. But if it's just a few links, it's probably a hat tip to the Oddfellows. Sometimes we just know too much, know more than we should at this point in time because everything's so available. I thought that was a really neat side note. She says conventional patterns were the simplest designs used by old-time rug hookers and rug makers. I found hooked rugs marked off, and we've talked about this too, marked off with a brick. In other words, when you have your bare canvas and you're looking, how am I going to do this? What kind of pattern am I going to do? I'm not an artist. People using a brick to draw around and do repeat with bricks. Patterns made by drawing around dessert plates and butter chips. Anne, what's a butter chip? Can you do wiki on that one? I don't know what a butter chip is. I know a dessert plate would be a small plate and a brick. But people making geometric designs on their backing using these things that they had around the house. Interesting, right? We talked about this before with the postcard, somebody repeating a postcard to make a design. But I had never heard of bricks, butter chips, and dessert plates. One very uncommon pattern was made by a woman in a New Hampshire village. She told me that now this is great, that she dropped a spot of ink upon a piece of paper, folded the paper in half, and then cut out the motif that was formed. In other words, she had presumably white piece of paper, dropped the ink so she could see it real well, folded it in half and made like a mirror image, and then when it dried, she cut it out. And she used that as her stencil all over her rug. She said that the way that this blob kind of turned out, because you see kids doing this, right? We always used to do this at school, do a blob and then see what we thought it was, something nice, something scary. But she said that the way this blob turned out, it had a very, she said, oriental effect. So that is just neat. If you are at a loss for a pattern, get out your ink, drop it on your thing, fold it in half, and see what you end up with. It might be a repeat pattern that'll be a fantastic Matisse-style abstract. Why shouldn't you, right? That would be fantastic. So that was just another great idea. This book is filled with these great ideas. She said you can unearth animal rugs in New England. We know that already because that's something that we would see again and again, right? Oh, by the way, this is an example of the rug with the endless chain border that she's saying represents the Atlantic cable being put down. Isn't that neat? Right around the border. That is good, isn't it? That's something I'm glad I know. Thank you, Ella Bowles. And she says she's talking about animals, and she's talking about how with New England rugs, you're typically seeing farm animals because it's like farm communities, right? You're seeing chickens and cows and those kinds of things. And she's saying once in a while you see a strange animal, and she says like a lion or a tiger, and it's kind of inexplicable. And they're usually not done real well in terms of anatomy because they're not typical animals to have around. Now this is interesting because we know since then we've looked at in coffee time at magazines that have said to us, in this town, a circus is coming through for the first time. They're bringing an elephant into town. They're bringing a lion into town. These people have never seen or heard of a lion or an elephant. And look, if you pay a penny, or probably a lot less, you get to see the elephant or the lion. Of course somebody in a remote New England town would make a rug after that with a tiger or an elephant on it. Because talk about a subject, right? That would really, really stick with you for a long time. That might be the most odd and curious thing that you see in your entire lifetime. So this is where the animal rugs are coming from. But in the 1920s, she doesn't have a lot of references to these kinds of events. So she's not putting that together with the kinds of wild sideshow culture that was happening in the 19th century. Butter pat dish. Okay, it's another kind of a dish. Wonder if it's, oh, you know what? It's probably like a butter tray, right? Like a little rectangular thing. Wouldn't be surprised if it was like what we would now have as like a butter dish to keep it out of the fridge, maybe. So she goes through all these ideas of where people would have gotten their inspiration. America was first beginning to feel her opulence, and the horn of plenty was a popular design. Now that is true, certainly in the 19th century. This is a quote from one of the women that she interviewed for this book. She said, this lady said, I made lots of horn o' plenties when I was a young girl. And she said a woman who spent nearly 90 years in the New Hampshire hills. And the woman said, would you like to know how I marked off my design? She's telling you how she transferred the design onto her backing. She said, I laid a piece of paper down on a horn o' plenty somebody had hooked on another rug. So she's borrowing the design right from another rug, and pricked over the design with a needle, right? So if you're a quilter, you know the wheel thing, real similar. Then I took a piece of burnt wood and rubbed it over the holes, and my pattern would show on my foundation. So she literally traced it from another person's rug with a pin or needle, and then she put it over her blank backing, and she rubbed burnt wood so that the dots would come through, and then she could trace it better. That's really clever. I have never heard an account like that. That is why these books are so great. So I thought that was super interesting. This is a good example of a tiger rug, right? This isn't typical in New England, but it's a 19th century rug from a remote place in New England. So she says the atmosphere of the jungle in a New England garden, and she finds it kind of inexplicable that somebody would do a tiger. So I thought that was real cute. Let's see what else we've got. This is a nice one too. This is a good example of using a lace pattern. Right? This is way more 1920s than earlier, but this is a great example of somebody using a contemporary reference like a lace design. Or silhouettes, silhouettes. You didn't see silhouettes with sunbonnet Sue in the 19th century, but you saw a lot of silhouettes. So that was another place people could pull for inspiration. She says now, okay, so she's talking about Gertrude Dewagger, who we talked about before. She had her grandmother hooked rugs. And she had an article in a magazine I haven't been able to find yet, in Antiquarian magazine. It's not on eBay or Abe or Amazon or anything. And the article is called A Memory of Grandma's Mats. This is an article I'd like to get a hold of. Slapper says, pin through paper technique is called prick and pounce. Okay, used in costume making. I know it from costume making, but we always used the wheel that was like a little pizza cutter to go through, and then we used white powder. So it's the same thing. I'm just amazed. I shouldn't be amazed because people weren't ding-dongs just because it was 100 years ago, right? I shouldn't be too amazed. I didn't know you knew about costume, though, Dave. That's interesting because I have a degree in costume. Useless though it is, except on Halloween. It was useless on Halloween this year, though. But yeah, we've done that in sewing for years, but I just thought that was real curious that people would do that with rug making, too. I thought, wow, she's a genius, but she probably sewed, too, so maybe that was just a carryover. So she's talking about the memory of Grandma's mats. This is a magazine article I hope to get. And this is a quote. And it happened, this is such a good one, Mom. Get your Kleenex like in your hand. And it happened now and again that some unknown genius of the hills has torn a beauty haunted soul to shreds and pieced it together once more on coarse burlap with bright hued fragments of discarded clothing. When she had done the work, she had no other name for it other than hooked mat. But it was and is 1,000 things besides. Isn't that so good? I need to pull a bunch of quotes out of this and put them on our page so you can look at them again, because that is so true. It's just a bunch of rags, but it's so much more, isn't it? Just got here. Oh, Susan, big lightning storm. I know it's crazy out, right? Big hello in Nova Scotia. Good to see you. White cock or blue. That's right. I forgot about the blue. I completely forgot about that triangular blue chalk. I think I forgot about it on purpose. Too many sewing nights. So this book, if you're just joining us, Susan, we're looking at a book from 1927 by Ella Shannon Bowles. It's full of sweet anecdotes. This whole chapter is called Back to the Old Dye Kettle. Back to the Old Dye Kettle. She's talking about a brass kettle in this chapter specifically. This chapter is so great for those of you who are interested in dyeing. And I have to insert here that I just ordered a bunch of natural dyes because you know I love the commercial chemical dangerous dyes. But I just ordered a bunch of natural dyes because I'm working with my sister who works at Yale. She's constantly using ancient pigments to restore very famous paintings. So we're doing a collaboration where we talk about pigment. She's talking about it in relation to paint, and I'm talking about it in relation to dyeing wool for hooking. But we're going to collaborate and do a series of videos, and we're well into the first one already, and it's going to be super fun and interactive where you can ask questions too. But we'll be using the same pigment basis. So I've been ordering a lot of natural pigments, and there's going to be more on that on this channel soon too. But she says, of course you know that you need a mordant to fix or set the dye. Now this is, again, natural dyes. Wood ash alkali was used by the ancients, and colonial craftswomen used alum or cream of tartar. She taught verdigris, different kinds of coppers. She's talking about a lot of things that people have used. Alum is practical because it's so easily obtained. And she says different recipes are given for mixing the mordant. One of the best is 3 ounces of alum designed to... So she gets into very specific mixing stuff. It's super interesting, though, if you dye. A few of the ingredients named in the pages are poisonous. Good side note, right? There's no star next to this. There's no hot chili peppers next to this either. And you should be careful. They should be handled with precaution. Others have unpleasant effects on the skin. It is always safer to handle wet dyed stuffs with a pair of forked sticks. So not like a not a spoon or a utensil, but actually go outside and find some sticks to pick up the wool because you might have something terrible happen after you touch these things. Oh, Becky, I'm glad you're there. You lost power for a bit. Well, we still have time. I'm probably going to go the full Friday right till 9. So we have time to be together. Don't worry. You can always watch back too. So funny, the dyeing. She goes through every color and tells you interesting things about it. I love that book. What was her name? Victoria, I think Victoria Finlay, Finlay, maybe Fandlay, Color. She wrote quite a few books, and I loved all of her books. But Color was a history of color. And I would say, other than that book, which is a huge, enormous book of hundreds of pages, this chapter is the second best reference I've ever seen to color in terms of history and naming colors. She goes through yellow, she goes to red. She talks about cochineal, which is one of the beetles that my sister and I are using. It's something that I ordered recently that makes the red, the bodies of the minute insects that feed upon cactus plants. She says it was always included in grandmother's dyeing supplies. See, this is important information because my grandmother didn't dye. She was a big crocheter. She did her laundry and she had one of those machines with that thing that the clothing squeaks through, the two big roller things that are super dangerous in the tub. She did a lot of gardening and stuff, but she wasn't a dyer. So I don't have this experience. But when she talks about what like every grandmother would have, like cochineal red dye powder, is not one that I would think of. She does this a lot in the book, and that's what makes this book a great time capsule because it really gives you a window into a couple generations back. She just constantly drops these interesting things. New England rug makers can purchase it in powder form at the drugstore. So I guess in these days, I know CVS doesn't carry beetle bugs, to dye with. But in these days, they did. It was no problem. Just go to the pharmacy and you get all your crazy dye powders there. So that was interesting too. She talks about cloth colored with alizarin, which has been found on ancient Egyptian mummies. So she's making the point that even then, people were decorating fabric with dye. And we know from the last bingo night or one of our trivia nights that they were also crushing up mummies to make mummy brown. And that is the origin. That's not what Cushing uses now for mummy brown, but that's the origin. She talks about pokeberry, which I sometimes talk about because that's the Magdalena Ebby Briner colored, the pokeberry bush with all those berries, where they got that beautiful red that she would use in those Pennsylvania rugs from that region. She talks about pokeberry, beets, and the colors that all these foods make. She says, again, Gertrude Dewagger mentions an interesting fact in regard to a certain pink dye used in colonial times. It was called attar. That was the one I was talking about. That's kind of a dusty rose paprika, or otto, which is an irregular, delicate pink or flesh tint. It was made from pink dust that was obtained by scraping soft bricks. So in colonial times, she says, it was no uncommon task for women to scrape the inside brick walls of tombs to obtain the dust for dyeing. So this is another beauty that I have never heard of before. This is like oh, what you doing, honey? Oh, nothing. I'm just scraping the inside of the tomb, to get some dye color. This is just something I've never heard before. So interesting this book is. She talks about oranges and browns and dragon's blood. That's also something that we used on our last trivia night. What colors those things make, the bark of butternut, hemlock, maple, all these different things. And she says, when is the best time to gather native vegetable materials for dye making, you will ask? Most authorities agree that October or November harvesting will give you the finest results, for then the seeds are fully ripened. Good information. Something else that I didn't know. It does sound good, doesn't it? This is just so. There is an art in the actual dyeing process that comes only by experimentation. Just how much bark or other material to use is the question. One authority says butternut bark, walnut shucks, sumac, pokeberries, onion skins, and so on, all can be held in both hands. A little more will do no harm. So in other words, they're saying that the measure that they're using is this much, and that's how they're measuring it. That precisely. And then she throws in this anecdote from the magazine called Modern Priscilla. This was a real popular magazine in the early 20th century. It's from a fiction story called When the Clock Reel Ticked. And she pulls a quote out of it that says, if like so many of us you're seized by the desire to have your own coverlets, just like the old ones, perhaps you will ask Aunt Genevieve how she dyes this rich color of ivory. Don't stand there and toot while I'm on camera. They're going to think it's me. So she's looking for this very rich cream color of ivory. And Aunt Genevieve says, just take a few pieces of bark and throw them in, will be your answer. Yes, but how much bark? You will interrupt her. Just a few pieces. But how much, you persist? My God, you can't do it nohow, was the answer. So in other words, these old timers are dying according to their hands or just a little bit, and they're not coming up with recipes. So for somebody in the 1920s who's trying to get the precise color of cream, they're super frustrated by these responses because they're not specific enough. I think that's really interesting. Patricia says, Forsythia will be in bloom soon and gives a lovely green. That is fantastic. Thank you. I wonder if we have forsythia around here. I'm doing my night still. Don't do crazy stuff.
Okay.
That is awesome. I love you though. That is awesome information. Dave says in Prince Edward Island they sell dirt shirts made with red soil. Perhaps they borrowed it from colonial times without the tombs. With or without the tombs. That sounds like the title of a memoir, doesn't it? How neat. But she just goes through all the colors. She talks about dye recipes from grandmother's notebook. I'm just going to read you these. I'm going to read you all of them. It's going to be fast, but it's so neat. If you want to make any of these colors, I'm not going to read the naughty ones. Beet red, cranberry red, cochineal scarlet, bright red, madder red, claret, crimson, salmon, these are normal, straw color, care citron, rich yellow, iron buff, yellow orange, orange, wine color, sky blue, blue, light blue, green, indigo blue, green. Everyone has like a full page of info about the history and where they get it from and when to get it. Manganese brown, snuff brown, London brown, butternut brown, catechu brown, dark tan, light tan, nankeen. Now this was an interesting one for me. Dave, you might be into this too because you know about costume. Nankeen was an interesting. It stopped me in my tracks because nankeen is like historically like a brownish yellow color, but it was odd because a nankeen is a garment. And it's like it's a cloth and a garment that people used to wear. So it must have been this particular garment was like for the bodice, and it must have been worn so often, and it must have been so synonymous with the color that the cloth was that nankeen went from being a piece of clothing to being an actual color. That's again what's so interesting about these books. Drab, purple, and incidentally, nankeen fabric came from the city of Nanjing, China. So that was one of these words that was anglicized over time. But man, she goes color to color through this whole chapter and tells you the sweetest stories about the origins of these colors. Chop up the branches with the blooms. Oh, that is good information. That is good information. So, we have to just get into this together, like figure out collectively what everybody else is doing with natural dyes. I would love to know. And I noticed that some of the Etsy stores, I bought from a couple different Etsy stores to get powders and things. I noticed some of them sell seeds. I don't know that they're okay for every sort of climate, but I thought that was really interesting that you could also buy seeds and start planting your dye garden. Doesn't that sound very Renaissance or something, doesn't it? Planting your dye garden? Something I definitely want to get into. So then she actually gets into the meat of the thing, which is how to hook a rug. And I'll tell you, she's great. Ella is great. She doesn't get crazy about telling you the specifics. She just gives you, I think people were typically a lot more capable back here, right? Back in these times. In the 1920s, you just give somebody a vague idea of how to do something, and suddenly they're teaching it the next day. They're just capable people. Patricia sounds great. Ooh, interesting. Yeah, we're going to help each other with dyeing and figuring stuff out. It's so much fun when we pool our collective knowledge. So she's talking about how to hook a rug, and she's talking a bit in this chapter too. She didn't put this in the design chapter, but she's talking about stencils and drawing something in the middle and then putting stencils around the edges. So she's talking about a kind of a mutation on a commercial design. You do your own thing in the center, and she's giving you lots of ideas already, and then she's telling you get stencils or make stencils. Now this part is really crafty rafty and I think super interesting. Stencils are satisfactory to transfer corners and ends. A fourth of a rug pattern should be drawn. In other words, it's going to be what's the word when everything's balanced? I'm tired. Um, I can't think of it. When it's perfectly balanced on both sides. You know what I mean, right? So you're dividing it into fourths, symmetrical. There we go. Place the stencil so that the edge follows a thread. what she means by follows a thread is you have to square it out, right? She's aware that you need to square it out or your design's going to go wonky if it goes crooked. So she's saying follow a thread. That's a really good and literal way of saying that. And fasten it into position with pins or tacks. So you're dividing your rug into fourths, putting the stencil that you've drawn or made into the corner with tacks, so it doesn't move at all, and you've got it right precisely squared out. So this is what we would do now, but this is just very, very good information. And another option, fill in the opening of the pattern with liquid bluing applied with a stiff brush. So bluing is actually like iron powder. This is another one of these things they would have had at the drugstore that we don't. Iron powder that you would mix with a little bit of water. And it made this very washable, cheap kind of blue watercolor substance that you could use for all kinds of things, including pattern transfer. So people knew what bluing was, and they had iron powder already. So this made a lot of sense if you were reading it in the 1920s. I'll be growing Dyer's chamomile in my garden this year. Oh, Karen, that is so cool. Now, is this a stupid question? Is that going to come out like yellow, I wonder? Or is that more of like a brownie brown? That is so neat. We should set up a club or something where you can like send seeds or whatever to somebody else so they can do it too. Would that be neat or would that be impossible? See, I don't know enough about it at this point to know whether that's a stupid idea. I'm growing lots of marigolds to dye wool. Saw a video inspired me. Oh, that's cool, Dave. I actually took a class, maybe, I don't know if it was, I think it was last year because I was wearing a thing, in natural dyeing, and it was super fun. And the first coffee time that I did was the day after I took that class. But that was the one that was, I think I took it down because I accidentally walked through the room with my bra and my underpants on. Do you remember that? I didn't know the camera was on, so I think I took that down, and I never recovered the info. So let's get into the natural dyeing together and share all that info because it was a super cool subject. What really got me about the natural dyeing was that some of the pigments were super expensive, like in the 80s, like 80 something dollars, and I was a bit in shock because I wanted one of every color. But hey, if you can grow it, then you're there, right? That's even better. Yellow. Okay, that is so cool. That is so cool. I want to get into this more too. So she's talking about transferring your stencil corners with the bluing. She says, I was once shown a rug bearing the picture of a stiff-legged horse. A woman who made it was the wife of a local horseman, and she had made the rug for her eldest son. She told me that she cut the pattern of the animal from paper exactly as a child cuts paper dolls. So pause. So this is cool, right? She's using stencils. She's making her own stencils. She drew a picture of a horse because her husband has horses, and then she cut it out like it was a paper doll, and then she put it, I don't know how many she put into her composition, but that was her composition. She made her own stencil. That is super cool. Kirsten, that makes me think of you drawing the cats and using those as stencils and moving them around your canvas, and then coming up with that fantastic composition. It's something that people have been doing for a while, but for people who are a bit, it's a bit of a speed bump thinking of doing an original design, just think about doing this technique with the stencils because it's something that you can do. It's something easy that you can do. I saw a big, I think you would enjoy doing some natural dyeing with what's around you. I used choke cherries with leaves and stems and got a beautiful pinky color, bark and canker that grows on dead trees. Oh, that is so cool. So you can use forsythia blooms for dyeing, Susie says. See, this really is such a cool subject. It's such a cool subject. You know, and I'm really interested in this now because I'm starting to feel the older I get, the same thing as not wanting to go on like the Ferris wheel anymore, a sense of mortality, right? Because I die like on average once a day, sometimes more. If I forget something, then the pots are out again. So I'm having this feeling of using chemical dyes all the time. I'm not a particularly green person, and I've always been okay with chemical dyes, but I'm thinking it might be a great thing, just a nice thing, a nice green thing to just start doing more dyeing, natural dyes, in a whole other palette, right? Because they really do look different. So I like this conversation a lot. This is really helpful. But I cut the branches in small pieces with the blooms. This is really cool. This is really helpful. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you for writing this. This is super helpful. I love it when we share. So she's saying, okay, so she's talking about doing, getting your piece ready. Different workers. Now this is really liberating too. Get the sentiment. I can't believe that she's as forward thinking as she is. She's talking about hooks, right? And she says, different workers use different hooks. and only experience can teach you what kind is best adapted to your hands. Isn't this a conversation we have all the time, particularly when we do classes and stuff? There are two things to remember, however. Too small of a hook will catch in your work, right? So if you've got like a teeny, teeny, tiny hook and you pull through a big primitive number 8, it's probably going to rip it in half on the way up. And this is number 2. And too large of a hook will make unsightly spots in your burlap. Now that doesn't hold true anymore because now a lot of people use linen, monk's cloth, and these things will just pop right back, right? So it won't leave an unsightly hole anymore. But that was a thing back in the day. She only breaks the hook thing down into 2 different things and says the hook has to be right for your hand. And if it's too small, it's going to rip your thing, and if it's too big, it's going to mess with your backing. Super simple, right? Super simple. That's all you need to know. She's not saying you should have a hook for every kind of size that you ever are going to work with in your life. She's saying, find one hook and it's going to work great for you. So she says, if you wish to have a hook made at a blacksmith's, now here's a beauty. Ask him to try a nail, meaning bend, about 1/4 of an inch in thickness, filed into shape at the end and bent slightly. Have him set this into a wooden handle. I think that might be a good luck with that kind of a thing in 2021. But hey, if there's a blacksmith near you that does this kind of work, that would be amazing, right? She puts in this great picture too, worker at the frames. Notice the method of sewing rug onto the frame. So this is a woman who's hooking in New England, right around the 1920s. I'm guessing this is an author photo. And she actually sews the rug onto the frame so it's nice and tight as a drum. My mom says, how about those super staining berries that pour down from the tree in my yard? The thing, I'll try those, Mom. I do have the neighbor, don't get me started. The neighbor and his stupid tree that overhangs the thing and broke off during a storm and could have killed like any of us or the pets, but whatever. That aside, that stupid tree is like pooping down berries for half of the year, and it's unbelievable. They've stained everything in the house because they get on your shoes, on your feet. I've never seen a tree like this. I don't know what it is. I'll post it later. I know somebody will know. But the thing about that, Mom, and I'm not the one who knows. I bet somebody is going to know. Patricia, you might know the answer to this. I have found with the limited amount of dyeing I've done with natural stuff, sometimes the things that you think are going to give you the most potent color because they're such a bright color don't give you hardly any color. That's the weirdness that I found with the very little bit of dyeing that I've done so far with natural stuff. The things that you think are going to give you really bright color give you like a super pastel shade, and they don't give anything else. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to give it a shot, but I don't know. It doesn't always follow. But, yeah, I hate thinking about those berries. But at least if I collect them and do something productive with them, that'd be better than retaliating, right, against the neighbor. So then she shows this cute piece in the handmade rug section. This is super simple. This is her idea of what's a good beginner pattern. She basically says anybody can do this, but she doesn't mean hook it. She means make it, like make it from scratch. So this is how she describes making this cute little basket piece. This is real cute. She says, as you study the picture, you'll notice that 5 of the flowers are a circular shape. Cut the paper patterns for them. In other words, she's saying make stencils again, make circles in different sizes. I'll show you the picture again at the end of this. The flower at the right of the basket is 3 3/4 wide, and she tells you the scale for all of them. So she's telling you the scale for the flowers in this basket. And she says above the basket are 2 circular flowers. She's describing the whole thing. The lower one is 3 1/4. The buds are 5 inches long. She's telling you in a bell shape. She's telling you exactly the sizes of everything. And she's basically saying, this is the scale of it. Get going. Cut some circles. I'm going to show you again. She's telling you how big the circles are. And she's saying, yeah, cut some circles. Draw these lines. You can make them into a bell shape. You see like the trumpet flowers. And get going. That's basically it. One paragraph. Kirsten, it looks, if the fruit looks like a raspberry, it's probably a mulberry. No, it looks more like a cherry. Like it's bright red, almost like a beet red. And it smushes and schmoodles. Like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like, there's thousands in one day that come down, like all over the garden furniture and the patio. You can get rid of them with the hose for 5 seconds, but then 3,000 more will drop in the next 10 minutes. It's unbelievable. It's like Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree. But sarcastic. It's like a sarcastic tree that's messing with me. Add a tiny bit to change the color You do get a lot of tans, but I like to add a bit of natural dyes to my rugs. That's interesting. Mulberry, yes, oh, maybe it is mulberry. I'll take a picture of it when it starts falling. I won't be at a loss for finding one. That is so funny. Maybe it is mulberry. You can't eat mulberry, right? Um, mulberry is a color with Cushing, but I guess it's not made from mulberries. But we'll see. I'm going to give it a shot. If anybody knows, let me know because I would love to do something with those stupid berries. So she's also talking about, in terms of transferring patterns, this is another this is just a great idea book. She's saying one woman, this is another woman who she knows from her travels, one woman who produces lovely hooked rugs told me her method of making basket patterns, like this was a basket pattern we just saw. She buys a piece of cretonne, which is a kind of fabric from Cretonne in France. It's a kind of fabric and it's a printed one and it's typically florals, but often like toiles, right, with scenes. So she's saying find a piece of cretonne with a basket design. So it already has to have a basket design. And she's saying cut the basket out. So find a piece of fabric you like from, I don't know, the drugstore, the store in your town that has like a toile design. Cut the basket out with the flowers, cut them out, and then trace them onto your rug. Trace around them. And again, it's a different way of using a stencil. But she's saying, if you have no drawing skill, get a piece of fabric and copy what they have on the fabric, if you like it, onto your rug. I think that's another amazing tip. I would use them. Try nothing to lose. Yep. Yeah, I might be surprised. Crabapple. No, not crabapple, Judy. I wish it were a crabapple because they would be bigger. I love to see crab apples. No, these are little devil cherries, but they could be mulberries. They might not be devil cherries. They might be mulberries, but they're awful. It's going to happen any day now. So then we get to the end. We're getting to the end here. Toward the end of the book, she talks about collecting hooked rugs. Now, you got to do a heads up again because here's another real cute vignette that she starts the chapter with. She says, the lover of hooked rugs, this is a person she's referring to, his wife and I were at a country auction in a tiny New Hampshire town on the Connecticut River. A throng of people, inhabitants of surrounding villages, summer residents, and the ever-present collectors of antiques watched with interest as the auctioneer held up a perfectly made, carefully preserved, old-time hooked rug. She says, it seemed absurd that anyone should presume to walk upon a thing of this beauty. Upon a background of cream color, she says it's cream like a skimmed pan of Jersey milk with a wreath of old-fashioned posies. She describes the endless black chain, so maybe again the Atlantic chain, the telegraph chain. She talks about the colors in great details. And she's making the point at the end of the book that collectors already at the end of the 1920s are having a really hard time finding rugs to buy because of the craze. The craze has started. And people are not able to find rugs anymore. The hooked rug mania is sweeping the country with as much spirit as the interest in early American, guess what, sandwich glass. You have only to try to collect rugs to find out how everybody is looking for them. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I'm not even shopping for them in the 1920s, and I'm still getting stomach cramps. Gone is the day when a well-made specimen could be unearthed at any country auction or purchased for the proverbial song from a white-aproned mistress of some outlying farmhouse. A notice of a country auction inserted in a local paper would bring collectors and antique dealers from miles around. So she's making the point already at this point in time. People, Ralph Burnham, one of them, are so aggressive about collecting rugs. It's very hard to find any of them. Martha, if you're watching, it reminds me of that story you were telling in Zoom about your mom having an adventure, which was like her code word for putting the kids in the back of the car and taking off to remote parts to ask people for buttons. It just makes me think of like your mom like winding down the window. Do you got any buttons? That kind of thing. This reminds me of that. Like people could no longer just go out into the world and say to the white-aproned mistress of the farm, do you have a hooked rug? Because they didn't anymore. And she's saying if you found one, that was a real anomaly. You could consider yourself lucky because it just didn't happen anymore. Devil cherry. There should be something called devil cherry. She puts a lot of rugs in here I've never seen before. These are really, really bad pictures. 1927, you get what you get. But this is Noah's Ark. And can you see it? You see the rainbow in the background? And this person has all the animals in twos, and the bears are on their hind legs. It's just a neat composition. I've never seen this rug before. I don't think it's a commercial design. Was owned by Mrs. Mary Perkins, and the animals went two by two. This was in House Beautiful magazine, but she doesn't say what issue every time, which is super frustrating because I would love to get a hold of that. This is another one that was in House Beautiful, owned by the same person, Mrs. Mary Perkins Taylor. Hey baby, she's just saying, it's these women outside with these period dresses on. But to me, I didn't have time to research it because I was in a real thing today. But this looks like a Manet painting, not a Monet, but a Manet. If you know Manet, Mom, I know you do. Doesn't this look exactly like one of his paintings? And I'm only making the point, who cares, right? Who cares? But if I wouldn't be surprised if the maker of that rug copied a Manet. Another funny anecdote, while we get to the end. A woman living in New York wrote me of such an experience with a hooked rug. The subject is still trying to find them. She says, as a child, I remember that this rug lay before the outside kitchen door to protect our linoleum. She's showing the rug to the author. After my marriage, it was rescued from our garage one Sunday through a friend of ours who's a connoisseur of rugs and who remarked to my husband, does your wife know you have it out here, like in the garage? It had been placed up behind the seat of our little open roadster for comfort for our beloved Irish Terrier, who always accompanied us on our drives. And she said, Reddy, that was the dog's name, Reddy, no longer rides on the hooked rug. So it was a neighbor or a friend that said, this is really worth something. You shouldn't really have it over the dog's car seat while you drive around the country in your roadster. So that made her aware that it was indeed something of value. The point that Ella makes often in this book, until she writes the book, she's saying historically people have had the idea that hooked rugs are worth nothing. And she's saying only now, in the 1920s when she's writing, are people starting to think that is not the case. Even poorly made rugs are worth a lot. Another woman found 3 rolled away under the eaves of an old attic window where she had been allowed to rummage. So she was allowed to go into somebody's house and rootle around in the attic, and she found all these rugs rolled up. The owner remembered that these rugs were taken up out of the parlor when the carpet was purchased. So they put in like a fancy carpet, and they put the hooked rugs up in the attic, and that was that for decades. And then this woman must stop by, maybe in her roadster, and say, can I rootle around the attic? And they, for some crazy reason, said yes. And she pulls out all these hooked rugs. One day, while driving on a back road in a New Hampshire town popularly named Bungay, a lover of antiques met a man with a basket of apples in the back of his wagon, and over the apples was thrown, somewhat worn, but a beautiful rug. Then there she stopped, and a business transaction took place, which made her the owner of the covering of that basket. So she just happened to pass somebody who was going by with a horse and used a hooked rug to cover a basket of apples, and he was very happy to sell it to her, I'm sure. Kara says, my mother used to grab up hooked rugs at auctions. After she passed, my dad needed a rug in his wood shop. When I saw it covered with wood shavings, I screeched. Needless to say, you have it now. That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, they go from place to place in the craziest places, right? Like at the beginning of the book when that woman said she was lamenting that she made a rug for her daughter-in-law and she put it in front of the stove, and she was saying, God, I would think she'd put it in a place of more esteem than that. But she didn't. It's just the way it is. So this book is just beyond. This book is just so much fun. She talks a little bit about, I skipped over the part, she talks a little bit about welcome mats, hearth mats, because we have had episodes on Coffee Time where we talk about hearth rugs. And, when I think of it, when you think of it, the hearth is still important, right? I mean, it's not important, colonial times important, right? People are not cooking on it. It's not the center of your home. It's not heating your home. But it's still important because when you think about it, Mom, I know you can relate to this, like all of the early pictures that I had growing up in like the 70s and 80s, going to prom, whatever, with my split down my head and my hair pulled off in a crazy hairstyle to hide it, we always posed in front of the fireplace, right? So the hearth is still a thing. Do people still do that when you have like an important family photo? You don't go and sit on the couch. You don't go in front of your giant TV screen. People, at least when I was growing up, people still went in front of the fireplace. Now, isn't that a weird leftover from like past times. I mean, it's almost like it's almost like it's hardwired and it's instinctive that the hearth is still the place. But she talks a lot about the hearth and welcome mats, different rugs, religious rugs, and again, patriotic rugs. Lots of different kinds of rugs, and it's all interesting. Christine says, our Nana lived in New Hampshire, gave us a rug when we were kids. I remember that we let the cat sleep on it. Rug is no more. Oh well, do you remember what it looked like, or do you have photos? Because you could always make it again. You could do a repro. That'd be a great project, wouldn't it? Yeah, the hearth is the heart of the home. That's right. I forgot about that. That is an expression. It's there for a reason, right? But I can't recommend this book highly enough. Again, I only have one extra. I shouldn't have any extras, but I do have this extra one. I made a lot of marks in this one in pencil, but still. So this is the inferior one. This is the one that I can sell if you want it. Um, oh, Suze, that's okay. You've been with your mother. First time you could take her out. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you could. That's even more important. Um, we were just doing such a nice thing. We still do the mantle or the foot of the foot of the staircase. That's another classic. Dave, I wonder if it's the same in Canada, but in early American houses, the foot of the staircase was a thing because at the foot of the staircase there was, now what was it called? Um, what's that like architectural thing at the foot of the staircase? When you paid off your house, right, like way, way back, it opened up. There was like a button on the sort of balustrade, and you would put the mortgage in it because it was paid and seal it up. So a lot of early American homes, when they have like an early staircase, particularly if it has the bob or like a corbel or something on top of it, it's a clue that there might be an old mortgage inside because it was very, very typical for people to put the paid off document for the house into the staircase. And I wonder if that's part of the reason that people stood in front of staircases too, because of that symbolism. Who knows? But it's just an interesting thought. You have prom pics in front of the fireplace in the 70s, right, Cynthia? It's like the thing. Go pose in front of the fireplace. It's just such a strange thing, isn't it? Suze, that's great. You took your mom. I'm really glad. Newel post. Thank you, Betty. Thank you. Newel post. So maybe it's shades of that too. That's a good one. I forgot about the newel post and the staircase. It's just weird things that get passed down, right? But I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I really can't. Oh, Wendy says, yes, my favorite photo with my daughter is in front of our fireplace, as well as 5 generation photos with the husband and the grandma. You know what? Maybe we should keep going with the fireplace thing. I have always had one that we don't have a fireplace where we live. I've always gotten the surround, like an old surround. When we lived in Amsterdam, I turned it into a bookshelf, and because it had a lot of depth, and I put like all of the books with the red spines in the center, so it looked like fire, and then all the darker spines as it went out. So from a distance, it looked like a kind of pixelated fireplace. But the point is, when you don't have a fireplace or the hearth, it's nice to make one because that's where we hang our stockings and that's where we put our little photos and things like that. And it is the heart of the home. It's funny that we have that in common, no matter where you're from. I think that's something that sounds familiar. Yeah, Sheila, I've heard that many times about the newel post. I've lived in a lot of old homes, but I've yet to find a home that actually has a document in the newel post. It would be amazing. Yeah, that would be a fun thing to find, wouldn't it? I'd be as happy with finding that as I would like a gold brick. I would just love to find something cool. Actually, no, I'd rather have the gold brick. But I would love to find something cool in an old home. Photos in the garden, the rose harbor or arbor new tree. Yeah. Living room was a gathering place. Yep. This is a funny side conversation because in our house growing up, the living room was where Dad sat with a nice cocktail reading his book. And we knew not to go in there. You just did not, unless it was a party and you were invited. We had a lot of parties. We had neighborhood parties, which people just don't do anymore. Work party, family party, neighborhood party. 3 parties my mom did at Christmas. We knew on those days we could go to the living room, but typically you would not go to the living room because Dad was in there reading his book and having a drink. We weren't barbarians. We weren't going to bug him while he was having a drink. But it's funny that was an off. Now the house is trashed with kid stuff. There's like no sort of demarcation lines where junk ends and civility begins. But that is something that has slipped with this last generation. Maybe I'm just lazy. The heart of the home, warm gathering place. So funny. Well, I'm glad that this brought back so many memories for you all talking about special places in the home. You know what it was? It was this book. This book, just this talking about it, reading things out of it, all these sweet, quaint things that are said. It's not a huge book. It's only like 100 and something pages, 200 pages. super quaint, and it really puts you in a time and a place. It is all about rugs, but again, all of these great anecdotes, great stories filtered in. I only read the part about the hooked rugs because partway through, because it's handmade rugs, not just hooked rugs, she talks about other kinds of rugs. So I read to page 99 is the last page that they're talking about hooked rugs. So this much of the book, which is more than half, is hooked rugs. Then she talks about braided or plaited rugs. Um, these are all things that are still interesting for us. Knitted rugs with knitting needles, crocheted rugs, patchwork and button rugs, which we often call penny rugs. Um, patchwork, cross stitch rugs. So, in other words, needlepoint rugs, odds and ends, different kinds of rugs. The woven rugs, so loomed rugs, embroidered carpets, so carpets made with a needle. And then she talks about again the Caswell carpet. We've done an episode on that. Commercial opportunities at the end. I read that chapter because she talks about a woman with a creative instinct. Anybody with a creative instinct, nimble fingers, artistic sense. She's speaking to the woman at the end of the book, where she says, "Listen, do you have nimble fingers? You should put a sign outside your house that says you make rugs and start a little cottage industry." And she says, you can't charge too much for your rugs because you don't have to pay the overhead of like someone who has like a business in another place. So that's kind of a weird piece of advice, a dated piece of advice. But, she says, and, if your business gets bigger, why don't you go to local hotels and libraries and ask them if you can put up a sign that says that you make rugs? So the last chapter, I skipped the in-between chapters, but the last chapter was great again because she talks about commercial opportunities, and she's encouraging women to make rugs, and she's telling you just what you need to do in terms of business structure to get your business off the ground. I thought that was super, super sweet. It's a wonderful time. Oh, thank you everybody for your comments. I'm recommending this book highly. I didn't even get to the other one, 1927. 1927. Well, look at this book this week. I just feel like going into the Wrinkle in Time thing with these history books. I'd love to look at the 1920s era books this week. I'd like to look at the Kent books this week. I'd like to go back a little bit and look at some of these older books. We're always looking at new books, and I love that. I love that too. But isn't it nice sometimes to look at the older books and the older stories? Some of the things that I read to you tonight were things I didn't know or I'd never heard before, and were just super, super, super uber charming. I just love it. So, Handmade Rugs, Ella Shannon Bowles. And I just want to let you know, one piece of business before I go. If you are on our oh, by the way, please like the video. Please like the video. I never make a big deal out of it, but please like it. Sometimes I can see that like 400 people have watched it and I have like 20 likes. It helps me so much if you like the video with YouTube and being people finding me, because then sometimes they go to my shop and they buy one of my hooking type things, and then that's my job and that's my income, which is so nice being somebody who gave up everything to have 2 kids and now finally have this business. So I really, it helps like you wouldn't believe to get like, or when you comment, which is fantastic. It all helps me with this stupid algorithm thing on YouTube that I don't understand, but it's a thing and it's real. So I just wanted to also say that, oh, did you, Kira? That's so great. Mom, don't buy it. If you want to read it, I'll give you my copy. And I know you're going to buy it no matter what I say, right? I just know you. It's a great book. It's a great book. It's super interesting. You're going to just love, you're going to fall asleep like I did, like this, every night that you have it in your hands, because it's just great, but without the snoring, I hope. One other thing I wanted to tell you, on the Facebook group, Liz put up a thing on Rug Hooking and Punch Needle Club. We are going to start, at least in our area. I'm in my 40s, right? 49, but I'm still in. Getting my shots already, all the vaccines. At this point, at least where we are in Connecticut, the people who want the vaccine are getting the vaccine, and that is great. I don't know what it's like from state to state, but Liz did announce at the Hillstead House, which is a beautiful historic property, and I made a great post about it not that long ago, because the woman that's there, the curator, invited us, and I was able to go look at 4 really important old rugs that they have in the collection. I actually think that Ella Bowles has a connection to that house. I'm going to have to double check, but I think she's the woman that lived in the house and collected those rugs. In any case, it's a beautiful historic property that is vast on the inside and outside, and we do have, we're starting up doing get-togethers with the thing on the face that I don't want to say, so that the video doesn't get pulled. But we are starting to get into a thing where we can look at getting together with distance, with the thing on the face. We're outside particularly. So I know there were some comments on there that were a bit harsh, like, "Are you out of your minds?" No, we're not out of our minds. We're just getting vaccinated, and we're still being super, super, super careful. I still get tested like at least once a week, and it's up to each person. But the kids are back to school, people are back to work. We are at the threshold of, at least in our immediate area, getting back to doing things so carefully. So if you are, in southern Mass or Connecticut, check out that post because that's something that we're going to be doing in the near future. I'm also planning things with Donna Swanson at Whispering Hill on the quiet corner of Connecticut, the southeastern corner that touches Rhode Island, and also with Chris at Sweetbriar in Rhode Island. Those are the ones that I have access to. So things like that are starting up. If you're starting up something like that, or about hook-ins or virtual retreats or anything going on in your area, please let us know in the Facebook group or on these threads so we can share that information, because people are just dying at this point to have creative things to do and to get together. So be looking out for all of those things. We're not going to be boobs and we're not going to be fools about it, but we're getting to a point that we can think about being careful and doing some nice things again. So, having said that, thanks. Oh, you are so welcome. You are so welcome, Kaz. You're there. You stuck right through to the end. Thank you so much. You've learned so much about American history and culture relating to rugs. That is so great. Kaz, when we used to do this episode, we talked about history almost every day. We've gotten away from that, and tonight we got back to that. So I'm really glad that we did. For everybody who's ordering this book right now, you are in for such a treat. You are just going to enjoy it immensely. So on Monday, I'm probably going to look at this book, Collecting Hooked Rugs from the Same Year. And we'll get on to some other stuff too, but lots happening this week. Class on Sunday night. I'll send out that information for the people who are taking the class on Sunday night. And in the meantime, it's Friday, so I won't see you until Monday. Coffee time on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Crazy weather aside, have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves. You just got your silk ties. Oh, good, Susie. I hope you like the ones I put in there for you. I tried to choose really different ones. Silk tie dyeing will be super, super fun. I'm glad you all had fun. Wish I was closer. Yeah, me too, Wendy. You're about as far as you can be in this country to where I am anyway. But soon, I hope to be on the move more soon. I hope to see more people soon and to travel again at some point. So we'll get there in the end. But for now, Zoom is working, right? So have a great weekend, everybody. I'm going to stay on for a minute because of the delay. But I'm going to drink my wine and I'm going to read the comments and have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday for coffee time. It'll be a great episode. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.
I think that was a great show.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, halfway I thought like, oh,